Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 111. Back to your regularly scheduled programming. Izuku was psyching himself up, gearing to walk into the classroom slightly sooner than he normally did to get his classmates time to question him, but not too much time before they would be cut off by the bell and forced to leave him alone. It seemed as though he wasn't the only one with that idea, though, as when he turned the corner, he saw Eraser starting toward the classroom from the other direction. He had a new scar under his right eye, and he looked more exhausted than usual, but otherwise, he seemed normal, like he hadn't been milliseconds from death just a few days ago. Izuku's steps faltered, and he found himself staring at the scar on his cheek, despite himself. "You all right, kid?" Eraser asked. Despite his calm tone and low volume, Izuku flinched slightly. There was a stillness to the moment that he had been completely lost in. "Yes, sir," he answered quickly, averting his gaze. "Mike said that word traveled fast. Everyone's been asking about us. I imagine we're about to be swarmed," Eraser warned. "Yeah, I figured," Izuku replied. "You ready?" "No," he answered honestly. "Me neither," Eraser shot back with a small sigh as he opened the door and strode into the room like he would any other day. The class went silent and then erupted into a cacophony of questions. Izuku expected that. What he didn't expect was Uraraka running over and barreling into his chest at full speed. His battered bones protested the harsh treatment, but he was too shocked to do anything but return the embrace. "Quiet," Eraser ordered, and the class obeyed without question. "Both Midoriya and I are fine. We will make full recoveries with no lasting issues. You have 5 minutes to ask questions, all of which are to be directed at me, not Midoriya. Everyone return to your seats. Raise your hand and wait to be called on. If anyone speaks out of turn, I will not be answering anything." Uraraka took a second to pull back and look him over, verifying that he was in fact there and was in fact in one piece before she relented and followed Eraser's directions. Izuku also made his way to his seat, doing his best to hide the fact that he was still favoring his left leg. As he went to sit, Shinso's eyes caught his. His expression was neutral, not the scowl Izuku had quickly grown accustomed to, but he didn't have time to analyze that before the class started their interrogation. "Is All Might okay? He hasn't been out since the attack," Sero asked once he was called on. "Yes, All Might is fine. He's been working closely with the school to improve security, which is why he hasn't been out," Eraser answered readily. "Kaminari," he called on the next student. "My mom said she talked to someone from UA and they said they didn't catch everyone. Is that true? Did they get away?" he asked. "Yes, that is true. 2 of the perpetrators got away. That being said, please don't go spreading that around. Rumors are one thing, but we don't want to incite mass panic with the confirmation from a first-hand source." UA made a statement the day of. If it wasn't stated there, then assume it's still confidential. We can't stop you from talking with counselors or your family about what happened. In fact, we encourage that you do. But don't speak with the press or post about it on social media. If anyone on campus pressures you for information, please let me or another staff member know, and we will take care of it. That goes for everyone in this room as well. I don't want to hear that you've been pressuring your classmates for their side of the story. If you want to share what happened to you, that's fine, but you aren't owed someone else's experience. For someone supposedly not ready for this, he was doing a remarkably good job at handling everything. He paused for a moment and waited for the next person to raise their hand. "Ashido." "I know you said you're fine. I didn't see what happened, but I heard, we've been talking, and it sounded like—" She glanced over to Izuku for a brief moment before returning her focus to the front. Are you sure you're okay?" She finally stumbled through her actual question. "Yes, Ashido, I'm fine," he said a little more gently than his usual tone. Izuku could swear he saw the barest hint of a grin on his face. What a softy. Kirishima, he called on the next hand up. Kirishima hesitated before speaking up nervously, and with none of the warmth or excitement his tone usually held. That thing in the plaza, was it human? He asked. Eraser took a deep breath and scrubbed at his face before answering that. No, I don't think so, he decided. You don't think so? Kirishima repeated, pushing him to elaborate on that answer. Well, aside from the philosophical debate as to what it means to be human, the autopsy has not been completed. There were preliminary findings, but I am not allowed to disclose them as they are still confidential, he explained. Amid all his panic, Izuku had been wondering what that thing was too. Shigaraki had said it was bioengineered. Did it used to be a person? Or several people even? Were their quirks harvested and grafted onto a base like limbs on a tree? He didn't know for sure, but he did know that it wasn't human. Not anymore, at least. Looking into its eyes answered that question for him. It was far from human. It didn't have a soul. It didn't even have the warmth that an animal might have. Izuku wasn't even sure if it could be considered alive. It was too cold, like a computer that had taken over flesh. It didn't have feelings. There was no emotion behind it. No, that thing certainly was not human. Izuku was pulled from his thoughts by the entire class bursting out into questions again. It startled him enough to jump slightly. Looking around and listening to what everyone was saying, he surmised that Eraser had just announced that the sports festival was going to be held as scheduled. That sounded like a bad idea, and he instinctively turned to Eraser to gauge how he felt about it, but he was already looking at Izuku. Oh shoot. He probably saw him staring off into space like he was having war flashbacks, which, to be fair, he kind of was, but that was neither here nor there. He cocked an eyebrow up almost imperceptibly in silent question, and Izuku nodded back, confirming he was fine before he thought better of it. That wasn't a normal interaction between two people who supposedly barely knew each other, and he hoped Eraser didn't look too far into it. Quiet. Eraser reined in the class again. It is out of my hands, but rest assured that security will be more stringent than ever. We will have over twice the police presence as we normally do, and pros will be patrolling the entire campus as well. No one is going to be stupid enough to pull something when a quarter of the country's defenses are breathing down their necks. That being said, if you don't want to participate, come talk to me during my office hours, and we will work out an alternative assignment. You will not be penalized for not participating, at least not academically. Your internship opportunities will be more sparse than they might have been, but you will still be offered some sort of internship, whether from the list of pros who open internships to all UA Heroes students or with a member of our faculty. If that interests you, we can go more in depth on it on a case-by-case basis. Understood? He waited for the class to nod or verbally confirm their understanding before he continued. All right, I will take questions by raised hand only. The rest of the morning's classes went by without incident, though it felt like Mike never took their eyes off of him for more than a second. He wished they would stop, but honestly, he couldn't blame them. Looking back on it from their perspective, it was probably a bit disturbing to see someone with two visibly broken limbs coughing up blood, thrashing around and screaming like a lunatic. Yeah, he would be pretty concerned about him too. It felt like a weight was lifted off his shoulders when they finally left, though. He was dreading lunch. But, as was wont to do, the clock kept ticking, and as ectoplasm left the room, dismissing them to the cafeteria, He felt half the class's attention shift to him. He ignored them and busied himself with packing up his backpack at a snail's pace, hoping that everyone would just leave him alone. Shinso and Bakugo, among others, didn't wait up to try and talk to him, which was to be expected, and it felt like those who remained were watching him like he was prey. Ida and Uraraka placed themselves in between him and the rest of the room as they chatted, and Izuku couldn't have been more grateful. He didn't know who all had seen what he'd done. He sent a knife into that thing's brain before he was even sure it wasn't human, and he didn't want to know what his classmates would think of him once they knew that. Shinso already hated him, and well, Asui he didn't know about, but she seemed more logic-based than most. She probably, hopefully, would understand that he did what needed to be done. As for everyone else, he wasn't so sure. They seemed wary of him, but he didn't know if that was because of Eraser's implied threats or because they knew what he did. He very much hoped it was the former, but teenagers weren't exactly known for keeping their mouths shut. Word was bound to travel eventually. 20 or so minutes into lunch, the painfully awkward silence was starting to get to him. Just ask your questions, he said, looking between Uraraka and Ida. Can I have your phone number? Uraraka asked without hesitation before doubling back. I was so worried and I had no way to. Yeah, that's fine. He interrupted her rambling as he ripped out a sheet of paper from one of his notebooks, wrote down the digits, and handed it over. Thank you, she said shyly as she entered the number into a flip phone. Ida was looking back and forth between the two of them and biting his lip. He didn't know for certain what he was stopping himself from asking, but he had a pretty good idea. We all would have died if you didn't go back to campus and get help. Thank you, he said, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. Ida's brow furrowed, and he looked back down at his lunch tray. He looked over to Uraraka, but she was looking at Ida with obvious concern on her face as well. It was clear that he didn't want to talk about it, though, and Uraraka turned back to Izuku once she realized that. No, you don't have to tell me what happened. You're okay, right? I know Aizawa-sensei said, but I saw you. When they wheeled you out to the ambulance, I saw. She trailed off and her eyes started to tear up. I'm fine, Uraraka. I swear. Just some broken bones, a punctured lung, and a lot of sprains. There was so much blood, she insisted, her voice barely audible and trembling. I don't think most of that was mine, he admitted. The blood from the Nomu was too dark to be human, but against the green of his costume, that probably wasn't obvious at a quick glance, and the blood on his hands was Eraser's for the most part. He didn't want to explain that, though, so he didn't. Ida was still quiet, but he had a hand settled between Uraraka's shaking shoulders. He wished they never had to see that. They were too young to be so disillusioned. It wasn't fair. Sue said, you saved Aizawa-sensei, Uraraka said with a watery smile once she'd pulled herself together. Izuku's blood ran cold at that. Asui had seen what he'd done. Had she told Uraraka? Had she told the rest of the class? Kami. He'd already started this year off badly enough. He didn't need a reputation for being a murderer thrown on top of it. Yeah, yeah, real smooth. He nailed that. Sheesh. Thank you for doing that. I mean, I can't imagine. I don't even want to think about that, she said with a humorless laugh as she wiped her eyes. Thank you for telling me what I needed to do. I wouldn't have gone if you weren't so insistent. Ida finally spoke up. Izuku blushed at that. That wasn't his best moment. He had treated his classmates like they were pros. It was insensitive, but he didn't have much of a choice. He needed them to listen to him. Sorry, I was kind of harsh, he replied as he looked down at his lunch and poked at it with his chopsticks. No, you were right, Ida insisted. I thought it too cowardly. I needed someone to give it to me straight. Your actions saved our lives. Izuku didn't know what to say to that. It was true. If he hadn't done what he'd done, people would have died. But it was uncomfortable for it to be pointed out so blatantly. He did what needed to be done, and that was that. He didn't want to be touted as a martyr. He was understanding why Eraser went underground more and more by the day. I think that's enough of all of that, Uraraka blessedly chimed in. Do you think you guys are going to participate in the sports festival? Yes, I understand reservations, but I think it's important to show that the school is unwavering against the villainy that threatens us. Ida readily accepted the change in subject. Yeah, I was going to participate too. I don't want to miss out on a good internship. My whole career could ride on this. You really never know. Uraraka agreed. Yeah, me too, Izuku answered, but offered no explanation. He needed to participate and make a name for himself in the spotlight if he was going to live up to All Might's reputation. But they didn't need to know that. Oh, good. I was worried everyone was going to drop out, and then it wouldn't be all that much fun, would it? Uraraka chirped excitedly. Izuku let the conversation flow between the two of them, tossing in his 2 cents only when necessary. He was so tired. The pain that still radiated throughout his body told him he was still healing, so fatigue was to be expected, but he felt tired down to his very soul. He supposed that with recent events, that was also to be expected, but it didn't make it any less annoying. He wished he could lie to himself like he always did and delude himself into thinking it would get better, but he knew it wouldn't. He was living on borrowed time, and if he thought he was in the shitter now, well, he had another thing coming for him. Midoriya, I want to speak to you after class. The words had been echoing in his head ever since Aizawa had stopped him in the hall on his way back from lunch. He'd put the pieces together, hadn't he? He was going to walk out of that meeting in cuffs or something. He was at least going to be put into the system and kicked out of the school. Kami, he was so screwed. What did it say about him if he was hoping he was just going to be questioned for attempted murder? No one had brought that up yet. Maybe this had nothing to do with Ivy. That was self-defense. Kind of. Sure, the thing hadn't attacked him yet, but it would have, so throwing a knife into its exposed brain was totally acceptable from a legal standpoint, right? Hell, he was so boned. When he walked back into the almost empty classroom, he was only slightly relieved to find Eraser was the sole occupant. Not immediately being arrested was good. Eraser glanced up from the papers he'd been grading. Take a seat, wherever you'd like. I'll only take a second, he instructed before turning his focus back to his work. Izuku looked around the room awkwardly before taking a seat at his own desk. It didn't feel right to take someone else's chair. Eraser did not seem to have the same reservations, though, as after about a minute, he walked over and took Bakugo's chair, turning it around to face him. I haven't gotten the chance to check in with you. Are you doing all right? He asked. That wasn't what Izuku had been expecting. Maybe he was starting off easy on him. Was he trying to lull him into a false sense of security? Because that wasn't going to work. He hadn't felt secure since he was 4 years old, and that wasn't about to change now. Yes, I'm fine. I'm going to make a full recovery. Izuku reminded him. That's not what I meant, though. I'm sure you're still in a hell of a lot of pain. I meant mentally. That was traumatic, to say the least. A kid your age shouldn't have to deal with that, he clarified. Well, he was right about that, but it wasn't much worse than what he was accustomed to. He was going to have nightmares regardless, so how much of a difference did this whole ordeal really make? A lot, actually. It made a big difference. He was not doing well, but what was bad versus a little worse? It wasn't anything that he couldn't handle. The nightmares would subside with time. I'll be fine, he answered. It wasn't a lie, per se. He would be fine. Eventually. Probably. He would be much, much worse first, but assuming Eraser really just wanted to have this meeting to see if he was okay and not to out him as a practicing vigilante, then everything could proceed according to plan and he would be fine in a few years' time. Eraser studied his face and didn't look very convinced. You aren't expected to be fine, kid. It's okay if you're struggling, he responded after a moment of silence. I know, he replied, not offering anything beyond that. He was being too nice, and it was putting Izuku on edge. Eraser wasn't supposed to be nice like this. Teachers weren't supposed to be nice like this. What you did was beyond illogical. It was reckless and moronic. It was pure chance that either of us lived. Eraser stated bluntly. Ah, there's the a-hole he knew and loved. But you saved my life, so thank you. However, if you do something that stupid again, I will expel you. Eraser amended the kind words immediately. Izuku had to hold back a laugh at that. That was almost verbatim what Mike had said to him in the hospital, sans the calling him a stupid moron bit. It made sense after having been together, or at least having been friends for what, like 14, 15 years now? Understood. He peeped out, because honestly, he didn't doubt the sincerity of that threat given the man's track record with expulsions. Have you made a decision about the sports festival yet? Izuku hadn't expected the subject change, but he answered despite his confusion. Yes, I plan to participate, he confirmed. You realize, as the top scorer on the entrance exam, you will be expected to give the opening address, Eraser asked. He was sure the color drained from his face, or his dread was somehow evident in his expression because Eraser ducked his chin down into his capture scarf the way he always did when he was trying to hide a smile. Sadistic bastard. I forgot about that. We could give it to the runner-up, Eraser offered, though he didn't make it sound like that was really a viable choice. Who would that be? Izuku asked. Bakugo. Eraser answered plainly. Izuku couldn't hold back his groan as he buried his face in his hands, and Eraser actually let out a snorted laugh. Eraser's laugh always made him laugh, so he was glad his face was already hidden in his hands as he smiled to himself. This was nice. He felt like they were Eraser and Ivy right now, not Izuku and Aizawa. It gave him the barest little bit of hope that he wasn't about to lose his only friend in a few weeks. Don't stress yourself out too much about it. Keep it short and simple. The less time you have to mess up, the better. Think on it for a few days, let yourself heal, and then focus on training. Your performance at the festival is going to be more important than a speech half the viewers are going to miss as they tune in late. Eraser did his best to assuage his concerns. That was probably true, but that didn't account for the entire stadium full of people who would be there, and of course the other half of viewers all across the world who would be tuning in on time. That was easily billions of people. Billions. With a B, as in the number 1,000,000,000 several times over. He couldn't even conceive of a number that high. Oh, sweet Kami. He would rather be hunted for sport. Midoriya, breathe. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. Eraser tried to calm him. No, I should. I need to do it. I can do it, he said in the most unconvincing way he possibly could. I know you can, but you don't need to. You have enough on your plate. If this is going to cause you too much stress, then it's not worth it. I can see you're determined, but you can back out at any time. I'm sure Mike would love to have another few minutes to hear himself talk if you back out last second. Izuku chuckled at that before he could stop himself, and a blush surely graced his cheeks when he shut himself up. But Eraser was wearing a smirk. Why was he acting like this? Like Eraser and not Aizawa-sensei? If he knew who he was, he would have said something, wouldn't he? Or was he just poking fun at him now? He might have jumped the gun thinking Eraser would have him arrested immediately. He realized that now that he wasn't panicking as much, but toying with him, he would definitely do that. Is that what this was? Was he just messing with him until Izuku broke and revealed who he was and confirmed Eraser's suspicions? No. If Eraser knew he was a child, he wouldn't let him go without looking into his home life. He was too fastidious for that. If he knew Ivy was a 15-year-old, he wouldn't see them as Ivy anymore. He would see him as a child, which is why he had to wait until he graduated. He didn't want to change what they had. He didn't want Eraser's pity. Midoriya. Eraser's voice brought him back to the present moment. Jeez, he knew he had a problem with spacing out, but it had been so bad today. Maybe everything that happened was affecting him more than he thought. Yes, sorry, I got it. He answered the last thing Eraser had said and hoped he hadn't missed something. The look on Eraser's face told him that either he had missed something or he had been spacing out in silence for entirely too long. The school is offering counseling, unlimited and free of charge, either with our counselors or your own. Did your mother speak with you about that? He asked. All right. If he missed something, apparently it wasn't important. Yes, she did, he lied. Eraser eyed him critically again, and the scrutiny made him uncomfortable. That was his I'm extremely worried about you stare, and Izuku was painfully familiar with it. It usually preceded one of his mental breakdowns. It was like Eraser had a sixth sense for when he was at his limit and about to lose his mind. He did not like that the ability was not lost on him as his student. I'm not a professional counselor by any means, but my door is always open to you as well. This isn't the type of thing you should try to go through on your own. Well, he was probably right about that, but it was exactly the type of thing he had been going through on his own for years, and he wasn't about to stop now. I know, he agreed, despite the fact that that was exactly what he was intending to do. Eraser looked reluctant to dismiss him, but he did anyway, and Izuku was all too glad to scramble out of the room as quickly as possible. End of chapter.